I'm finding a lot of organizations struggling now to find executives, people for senior roles that have an openness to AI. You talked about past performance being a good predictor of future performance. That's true until there's a serious disruption. And I remember one pilot says, the best thing that you can do when the alarm bells start going off is ask for a cup of coffee. Your temptation with your amygdala hijack is to immediately start pushing buttons, start barking out orders, start doing this or that. And that's usually the wrong response.
So, hey, welcome back to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. I am really happy to have Eric Olson with me today. Eric is the founder, president of EMO Advisors. He's a PhD in psychology. And he has got a long track record of helping companies build cultures and effective teams. Has got some very impressive clients, Microsoft, Spirit Airlines, Hawaiian Airlines, Ford, and several others. So, Eric, thanks for coming on today.
Absolutely, Craig. Delighted to be here. And I have a feeling we have a lot we could cover with your work in executive search, because I came from a large consulting firm connected to executive search. So I enjoy having conversations about what talent organizations need in order to drive performance.
So talk to me about, who hires EMO? I mean, you've got some big clients in there, Microsoft, Spirit Airlines, you've got customers with thousands of employees.
Yeah.
Who hires you to come in and do your training?
I found many years ago that as a psychologist, people in business looked at me a little wonkily, like, what can you do to help us? And I quickly found that I had the ability to quantify some of the human performance issues in a way that related to and even predicted organizational performance, financial performance. So I started getting hired by organizations that wanted to know how could their leaders improve organizational performance. And I could quantify that. I developed a model for showing how leaders could create a more resilient culture that would lead to better financial and organizational performance. And that really, for the past 20 plus years, has been my calling card.
So I've got more and more clients right now using psychological, I don't want to say profiling, but they're using, psychological testing, with regards to executives. And, obviously there's a lot of tools. You get to learn a lot about a person through that, how they respond to criticism or how they respond to feedback or how they lead, they guide. From a business standpoint, what's going to predict future? Is it, what predicts a person's success in an organization? Is it past performance? I mean, you've got people out there that have been rock stars somewhere else, and then they get into a new organization and they flounder a little bit, or vice versa. You've got people that have been kind of like, a rudderless ship, and then they come in and they knock it dead. What's the pattern there?
Yeah. Great question that could require several hours to unpack, but let me just give you the headlines from my perspective. I don't know about you, but I'm finding a lot of organizations struggling now to find executives, people for senior roles that have an openness to AI. Mm-hmm. And you talked about past performance being a good predictor of future performance. That's true until there's a serious disruption. And I increasingly, Microsoft would be a good example. Right now, I'm in the thick of it because they are having to change their business model to say, if you don't know how to integrate AI and use AI-enabled tools in your work as a leader, it's hard for us to envision you as being in our future. Mm-hmm. And tech is obviously going to lead the way in that, but increasingly any industry like aviation, where you have automation, where you have technology assisting in flying and operations, I find that organizations are looking for leaders who are resilient, and we can talk about that a little bit. If you go back to the big 5 personality factors that are probably one of the best places to start in terms of looking at profile, that willingness to be open to new ideas is paramount these days. It can't be only that, because if you have somebody who's in a high reliability role, like leading a flight crew, you also want them to be incredibly conscientious. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But I'm increasingly finding organizations saying, is this person that we are going to hire only looking in the rear view mirror? Or do they have an appetite to go into the unknown and help the teams and the departments that they're leading also embrace that uncertainty of the unknown? If so, we should be talking.
It's interesting, Facebook's out there now, just paying hundreds of millions of dollars,
indeed,
to the AI geniuses, call them, the people who really understand AI, and it's the race for AI, experience, intelligence. Not to get political, but Europe is falling behind because they are not embracing technology like the United States and China have done. Is the future of executive leadership going to be thinking 4 chess pieces, 4D chess, or thinking 4 moves ahead of you and having people who can do that? Or is it going to be, the basic, business leadership that we've seen?
Well, there's only one Nobel Prize winner in economics who studied pilots as a basis for his Nobel Prize winning work. And that was Daniel Kahneman, recently passed away. But one of the things that Kahneman did in his book about thinking fast, thinking slow, is to realize that we have cognitive biases, and we tend to overestimate our own abilities and we underestimate the abilities of others. And he showed how that played out in stock market picking, right? And so I just find it fascinating that while Europe in general has fallen behind in recognizing those 2 cognitive errors, the Norwegian Sovereign Trust, which manages all the $2 billion or $2 trillion.
Trillions,
yeah. Their CEO said about 4 years ago, cognitive biases, I am convinced, are costing us huge amounts of money. Used AI and wound up just showing that they gained a 20% productivity as a result of that, and changed his hiring profile and said, I'm not hiring anybody anymore unless they can show me how they used AI to help us become more productive, eliminate cognitive biases in our investment picking, et cetera. So I think there are going to be more and more companies that make mistakes trying to figure out how to eliminate cognitive biases, but then they'll get smarter and smarter and smarter about how to do that. So I think today's executives absolutely have to figure out a way to make friends with that technology-enabled assistance that helps them get rid of some of the biases they have that can be costly.
Yeah, it's interesting. My son is applying to med school right now, and there's an AI. It's interesting to see in the university setting what AI is doing, and look, I can read someone puts a blog post up or something, and you can just look at it and go, they didn't put any thought into this. They, Chat GPT. And you can just tell by the sentence structure and how it flows and whatever else. And it drives me nuts. But on the flip side, you're thinking about people that are writing technical papers, or they're coming up with, there's no excuse not to use AI.
Right.
For grammar, for structure, to get your point. Is my writing meeting the stated goal of so there's this big push and pull. And some questions are now coming up out of the med schools. Is that, what does AI in the future of medicine mean to you? And it's a very interesting thing. If you're using it as a crutch, you're going to fail. If you're using it as a tool, the world becomes your oyster, in my opinion. I don't know, maybe not, but that's
No. I have 19 family members who are in healthcare, physicians, nurses, administrators, et cetera. So this is a very relevant topic at family potlucks. And to your point about the future of medicine and how we're going to see talent thrive in that field going forward, I'm going in for a small laparoscopic procedure next month. And it's going to be AI assisted with robots. And ironically, I'm only going that way because I trust the surgeon who's going to be directing it. I feel like there is the best of both worlds there. I'm getting, technology that can sense where blood vessels are and how to avoid cutting into them, how not to damage nerves because of the AI assistance. But I absolutely know that his skill and his thousands of hours and hundreds of operations that he's done give him, as he said, sometimes I know when to go against protocol. And I actually help the AI device get smarter. So, that's to me is typical of what you see as the best is people who are confident in their critical thinking skills, but know that they have to let their ego make room for the input of other people, even other devices.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you think about we'll go to, this is the Aerospace Executive Podcast. And Delta Airlines, the big controversy right now is Delta said it's going to come out and start using AI for pricing. And the controversy is, well, they're going to profile you, they're going to profile me, and they're going to see how much share of my wallet or your wallet they can get. Good on Delta. They're thinking about it. Yeah, hey, look, they got a business to protect, and marginal cost equals marginal revenue, where profits are maximized. And I want an airline that actually makes money, because if they're making money, they're not skipping steps. On the flip side, it's a cat and mouse game. Somebody else is going to use the same tools in a different manner. They're not going to own, Delta's not going to own the market. They're not going to own every seat in the sky. And somebody else out there is going to figure out, using the same tools that Delta's using, how to not get you to buy a seat on Delta. And
In fact, somebody already sent me the prompts I need to put in order to find better pricing than what the airlines have found me.
Yeah, or it becomes a bidding process. Yeah, Delta, I'm happy to I'm happy to use my loyalty and accept your pricing, but if you give me this, I want 5,000 more bonus points on my frequent flyer, because loyalty or whatever. I mean, there's going to be so many ways. Yeah, I look at it like the world's just changing. It's kind of exciting to see what it's going to do, but it's pretty cool to see what happens. So, so this is what you're teaching future executives, is to, hey, look, embrace the change.
It really is. Because the alternative is to go into the amygdala hijack, fight or flight. And we know that creativity declines, productivity declines, collaboration declines, cognition declines when we go into that space. So if you're looking for job security or job growth, it's really hard to imagine how retreating into that state is going to help you. Even though it's totally understandable psychologically that you would want to protect yourself, it feels like a threat. The amygdala is doing what it's supposed to do by protecting you, but it's a short-term solution that ultimately is going to be defeating. So that's really what I get to work on, is helping pilots, helping crews, helping executives realize your natural response to threat is there in one way to protect you. But if you stay there, it's going to actually be counterproductive.
I talk about that all the time. You talk about people who are very comfortable in their roles. Well, you know, I think the best offense is in life, best protection in life is being very comfortable being uncomfortable. Because it's the people who, if you're on the battlefield, moving is essential, because if you're staying still, you're going to get killed.
Oh,
Moving is, yes, there's a threat to, intelligent moves. But the bigger threat is just staying there and staying in place, finding your comfort zone and saying, this is good. I never can really communicate that effectively, because I never want people to change jobs or careers just for the sake of changing jobs or careers.
right.
But I always want them looking out, going to conferences, finding personal growth so that they can understand exactly where their best and highest use truly is. And it's usually not where they are now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, you and I are talking and having this conversation in part because I grew up with a father who was so good at his work as a heart surgeon that he was traveling around the world teaching other surgeons how to do heart surgery the way he did it. And by the time I was 19, I had lived in or traveled through 42 countries. So I just grew up not knowing anything other than change because of the life that he exposed us to, and my mom as well. And well, I had 4 siblings, and half of us thrived in that environment, and the other half did not. And so it's not guaranteed that just because you're exposed to constant change that you're going to accept it, or embrace it, thrive, and use it. But it is interesting to see what happens that when you do figure out a way to make it work for you, it can lead to a career like the one that you and I are talking about, where you're embracing that change. You're actually seeing it as, if other people are fearful, they're threatened by the disruption, that's my moment to strike. That's my moment to step forward and move into it, be it on the battlefield or be it a corporate environment.
So you did a study with 1,000 pilots recently.
Indeed.
What do you learn from 1,000 pilots? Well, not coming out the pilot jokes.
Yeah.
What horrible things does dealing with 1,000 pilots teach you? Or great things.
Maybe I have a couple of slides. Let me see if I could show you. One of the things that was important for the FAA to say is, what do crews do when they're flying at their best? Because there have been a number of accidents, some fatalities, where crews were distracted, something happened, and there was human error involved, and they were really wanting to look at how can crews be at their best, and what does that look like? And so I got to spend about 1.5 years with first officers and captains asking that question, having some research behind to guide the conversation. And you asked kind of what's the personality that might work best there. Many people know about the DISC personality assessment.
Yeah.
Dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. And what I liked about using this with the 1,000+ pilots, and I've actually used it with other airlines as well, is how it shows the natural and adapted style. So the natural style is if you're at home, just sitting, watching TV, reading a book, doing a podcast, this is how you're going to show up. Your adapted style is what you look like when you go to work. And what you notice here is pretty much with pilots, what you see is what you get. And that's the good news, is because if you have to make too many changes to your natural style at work, that creates a source of friction, tension, distraction, because you're doing something that doesn't come natural to you. But you'll notice of the 4 items on the scale, conscientiousness and steadiness were by far and away 2 of the most highly used personality preferences, which when somebody gets into the cockpit and sits there and is going to spend anywhere from 2 hours to 10 hours, you really hope that they don't mind being conscientious and steady if something goes wrong. You really don't need people who say, I'm getting in here, and what I really hope to do is be able to, use my influence. I'm highly enthusiastic. I might let a few people ride here with me just because I like, this is a temperament issue. And so what was encouraging to me was the natural style that you saw of pilots really fits the job. So I came up with a question, maybe you can have the answer. Does a pilot choose the job, or does the job choose the pilot?
It's interesting looking at this. I would have thought much higher on the D for a pilot. Much higher on the D to that regard. Yeah.
I'm so glad you picked up on that. In the next slide or two, I want to show you why it isn't higher. Because there are so many jokes about pilots being cowboys, pilots being, in the big guy in charge, and the 4 bars, all that kind of stuff. And in practice, that turns out to be a caricature with some truth, but not nearly as much as people thought. And there's 2 reasons. And in the work that I did, I relied on 2 theories, and we tested both of them out in this work with the pilots. One came from social identity, which says a leader gains status and improves his or her team's effectiveness by conforming to the values and attitudes of the group. So when a pilot would arrive and be part of a new crew, one of the things that made them a leader was their ability to assimilate the best of what that crew demonstrated in their values. And I saw that happen a couple of times when you had a really strong D. So clearly an outsized personality, a John Wayne type, that was really throwing himself around in the classroom. And the rest of the group, I didn't have to do a thing. Their pressure, their peer pressure, helped him realize. And in fact, I was shown a text that was being passed around with a picture of this one guy who was really being a jerk. And the title on the meme was, "Don't be like that guy." So it's interesting to me that pilots have a way of regulating outside D behavior when it gets in the way of being conscientious and steady, which goes to the safety of the mission. Does that make sense to you? Do you see that?
Yeah.
So that was one thing that I was not aware of until having done this work, is they have a way of speaking. I see it actually in medicine because of my father. I saw that physicians often were the best source of regulating other physicians, rather than hospital administrators, rather than somebody in Washington. Peer pressure was helpful. So that's one thing we found. The other was pilot leaders tend to emerge when they demonstrate competence towards an external task. So whereas the other theory was focusing on inner values and assimilating to that, this is about showing competence to meet an external task. And we'd ask them this question: think of somebody that you enjoyed flying with, that made it a flawless experience. What did they do that would make you want to fly with them again and again? And oftentimes what they were describing was the ability to bring out the best in everybody who was on the flight. So it was not just about them as an individual being competent. It was really about how they were able to draw out the strengths, really focus on what the mission needed to look like. How we did the walk around, how we did the first crew debriefing, how we did the mid-flight, all those kind of things. So it was very interesting that you also had this external benchmark of leadership in addition to the internal one.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you think about the people you always enjoyed flying with versus the people you didn't, and tension in the cockpit. It is not. You hear all the stories about tension in the cockpit causing mishaps or bad scenarios.
Absolutely. And this intrigued me so much because I'd heard anecdotally about this. So we spent some time actually trying to dig down into what is it about leading a crew that is the secret sauce. And we came up with 4 things. They're called prototypicality, which is a fancy way of just saying the way the best operate. So the way that the best leaders operate in creating crew effectiveness is they convey credibility and status by the way they show expected behaviors that achieve mission success. I love being able to sit near the front of the plane. I got to do that a lot for business because I could tell by the captain's demeanor what he or she walked on the flight. From the moment they walked on, they had a certain way of setting expectations, either in terms of attention to detail, in terms of connectivity with others, with respect. You could just tell those in the first 15 seconds, the kind of tone that they were setting. We talked earlier about the culture. That's what they were doing, is they were setting the culture. The second thing that they were doing was they had the ability to not only talk about and create positive ones, but they minimized negative consequences. And that led to an increase in trustworthiness, because if I'm going into a crisis, an uncertain circumstance, the weather's changed, one of the things that in the back of my mind is important is, am I flying with somebody who has a history of minimizing negative consequences? And it turns out that pilots know who's the safe person to fly with if there's going to be trouble. So that was interesting. Third thing was, there's an in-group and an out-of-group identity. And so you quickly can sense when am I working with somebody who knows how to create a strong in-group behavior, so that if, let's say, there's an instance of air rage, we know that as a crew, we're going to all stick together because we're on the inside. We're not going to leave our flight attendants at the back to deal with this and say, oh, sucks to be them. I'm sure glad we're up here at the front of the plane with a door between us. No, it's definitely this sense that we are all on the same side. We're part of the in-group, and we're going to have that be a strength for our mission. And then the last one, which I kind of already alluded to, is that the ability to self-regulate, as opposed to saying, well, no, I'm sorry, I'm a victim to all the rules and regulations FAA, the airlines have given me, sucks to be in our environment. No, that's not the language that they're using. They're really talking about, we are in control here. This is our mission to accomplish. And I think you see that in military teams. You see that in any high reliability teams. Not a sense of victimization, but a sense that this is our chance to self-regulate to excellence and performance.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you probably see that as well in your work.
I do. I mean, I do. And, but yeah, I mean, I definitely saw the military teams, and you read about it. They all talk about the team, the performance of the team, not the, no I in team. Right. So, and they do tend to self-regulate the people out that don't fit that mold.
Yeah. In my role with the global search company, I had some research done because my job was to hire consultants around the world at the partner level. And the one factor that turned out to be more important than any other was not industry experience in search, but in the ability to show self-initiative. If you could find somebody who had a history of self-regulating themselves in spite of difficult circumstances, in spite of down economies or whatever, they had a way of regulating their behavior in such a way that it adapted to and even anticipated disruptions. They were keepers because you could throw almost anything at them, and their MO was, how do I find a way to make something good come out of this?
Well, that's a great. I mean, look, that's a good point for any executive, candidly. Economies, go up, they go down. We've all lived through the Great Recession. Or some of it, you see what's happening politically now, and your job as an executive is to cut through the noise and figure out a way. If you're just going to float like a jellyfish and go with the tide, then you're not overly valuable. as an executive. You're just kind of floating with the tide.
Yeah.
But the people who thrive in business and just in life in general are people who can figure out their own path no matter what is thrown at them,
Yeah.
politically or economically.
I have a front row seat to watch Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, because I was involved with the team that helped the Microsoft board select him as CEO, because he was going to change the culture that Microsoft had fallen into with his predecessor, and it needed to definitely change, or the company was going to truly lose and wander off into the wilderness. I'm watching him now as he has to pivot from what he was brought in to do and now create a culture where people can thrive with an AI-centric world. And that means laying off as many as 15% of the company globally in order to be able to pivot and have the talent 2 years from now. That is not an easy decision. That is not something that you wake up in the morning and say, I look forward to having to reduce headcount by 15% in order to still be here 2 years from now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not. But on the flip side of that is investing in your future and future, and this goes to people. This is why you've got to be constantly, looking internally and saying, am I growing? And I use there was an aerospace company about 4 or 5 years ago. They laid off 700 people.
Yeah.
And all the people, if you just kind of peeled back the onion on it, they were all senior manager to director level. All of them had been with the company for 20 to 30 years. So they'd kind of risen to their point of, call it institute, whatever you want to say. They'd probably risen to their highest point in the company that they're ever going to go. And the CEOs makes a hard decision and said, hey, I need to start to think about opening up some space for young people to grow too, or new blood to come in. It's a hard decision for a CEO to make, but it's one that's very good for the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's the way you have to look at things. But there's only so many spots, so you got to continue to invest in people.
It seems like our conversation keeps coming back to this notion of leading in
Keep going.
challenging environments.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I bet you that you've seen something like this before, which comes out of the safety management systems and breaking down a typical flight into its various phases, color-coded according to level of risk. So obviously red being highest risk, yellow moderate risk, green lowest risk. And I like this model because what it allowed me to do with the pilots and first officers was to then say, let's talk about you and how you not only are reactive to a situation and demonstrate leadership and resilience, but also how you anticipate. Because I think one of the things that we're coming to realize is to be resilient is not simply about bouncing back. It's also being able to anticipate for the next one. Yeah, and particularly with AI, I'm finding there's not enough time. AI can do in seconds what used to take you weeks or months to. So you don't have time to only be looking in the rearview mirror. You have to truly be thinking, like you said, a chess move, 2 or 3 steps ahead. And so we use this model to then get people talking. What is it that I do when I'm at my best in the high red zone areas here, where I've got change of speed, I've got takeoff, I've got landing, I've got all kinds of complexity there. What do I do when there's boredom because there's a long period where nothing seems to be taking place, but you never know when environmental factors could change place. So we had lots of structured exercises, some case studies that we gave them to look at this. And then what came out of it was a series of observations that I put into a model that came out of my dissertation work some 20 plus years ago, that I looked at teams who were thriving in an environment of disruption compared to other teams that were cratering. They were not performing well. They were going into depression, high anxiety, stress, health factors out of whack, all that kind of stuff. So call that the Olson resilience model, because it began to be something I saw over and over again, whether in small family-owned businesses, small to medium-sized businesses, all the way up to the Fortune 50 size companies that I've worked with. And basically, teams that thrive did three things. The phase one was they created clarity. And that's really a mindset. So the leader of the team and the team itself developed a mindset that said, what are we seeing that we need to see even better in order to understand this change that we are experiencing? Are there things that, because we tend to be more creatures of habit, we're choosing not to see, maybe even unconsciously, but it's a bias that we have that is going to perhaps bite us in the butt if we're not aware of it. If you didn't have that commitment to clarity, and again, one of the reasons why Satya was selected as CEO at Microsoft was his whole mantra throughout his career had been, let's create clarity. It was just one of the very first things he said upon becoming CEO. We need to create clarity. What is it that we're about? What is it that we are not about? And so with pilots, they talked about the fact that there's these three things that they look for to help gain clarity, to identify performance changes. So not ignoring when there's something that is changing, when might be so much easier to just say, oh, I'm distracted, I've got other things going on. No, identifying that performance change. Secondly, you talked about the noise in the system. Being able to separate the noise from the true signal of danger turned out to be something that they said oftentimes only comes with experience, where you can separate out the difference between noise and signals. And then that led to the third one, which was, let's really stay with this clarity until we get to the root cause, not simply stay at the level of symptoms. And we then unpack that in terms of a habit called press pause. And I remember one pilot says, the best thing that you can do when the alarm bells start going off is ask for a cup of coffee. Because they said your temptation with your amygdala hijacked is to immediately start pushing buttons, start barking out orders, start doing this or that. And that's usually the wrong response. Right. Yeah. So we talked about the ability to have this habit of pressing pause, which is a mental discipline, to really ask yourself, okay, why is it that I'm picking up all these sensations? Several pilots said, my best indicator of the need to gain clarity is when I feel the hairs on the back of my neck go up and I'm not sure why.
Yep.
So
I'll use it. I'm going to go back to my son and my daughter. Now my daughter again. My son's a paramedic. My daughter is a trauma nurse.
Oh.
The first thing my daughter resolves back to is, cut through the noise. What brings you here today? Now, if obviously somebody's bleeding out in front of her, it's a very easy question. But the noise. Yeah. Not what are your symptoms. What brings you here today? That's the signal. My son, the same thing. He says, when I start getting overwhelmed, stop, slow down, reevaluate. It's interesting how they're taught, very much like pilots.
Yes. In fact, I had a pilot when we went through this step. He said, this reminds me of a time in which just a couple months ago, we did the crew debriefing, and I could tell my co-pilot was not focused like he normally would be. And so as we're walking towards the plane, I just walked with him out of earshot of anybody else. And I said to him, I'm just noticing that you seem a bit distracted today. Is this going to be an issue for us? And he said, it might be. Just before I left the house, a process server came and gave me divorce papers from my wife. And he said, I'm a mess. And so they actually worked through that before they got on the plane, figured out whether or not he could get his head back into the mission, or whether or not it would be better for him to excuse himself. And he said, fortunately, that conversation, which took about 3-4 minutes, allowed him to refocus. But he said, had I not done that, I have no idea what would have happened.
Yep.
With that level of distraction. So I think sometimes it is not easy. It requires courage to be able to have a constructive confrontation to say, are we clear? Do we really know what's going on? To get the example you gave with your daughter. Yeah.
It's great for business, great business conversations too.
Oh, absolutely. Because it's so easy to just say, well, we've always done it that way. It's a sacred cow to such and such a VP. Don't want to ruffle their feathers. No, somebody's got to be able to say, we are losing margin. We are losing customers. We are losing X. We have to call that out. The second thing that the pilots and many other teams validated was, if you are beginning to identify the root causes, if you've gained clarity, that's not enough. You now have to be able to say, kind of the so what? What's the deeper connection that this change means for us? And so there's a kind of vulnerability there that goes beyond just being effectively clear. It's the willingness to say, I think we need to see this issue differently. Otherwise, we're going to simply repeat the mistakes of the past. So we call that connecting deeper, because it's about reducing the boundaries between the way you work now and the way you need to work. It's about talking about taking risks where it's appropriate and prudent, and it's about seeking solutions inclusively. What do I mean? One of the crews talked about the fact that they were halfway over the Pacific and a sensor started going off, indicating there was engine trouble. They were trying all kinds of things, going through their protocols, trying to figure out nothing was working. The captain let the flight attendant know that they were experiencing some difficulty up here with the sensor, just because it was his habit to keep them in the loop. About 2 minutes later, the flight attendant came back and said, we happen to have an engineer riding with us today. He's from Airbus. He thinks he knows what may be going on, that there's a faulty sensor, that it's not actually a true alarm. He suggests you try this, this, and that. To their credit, they were willing to think bigger. They were willing to connect more broadly, reduce the boundaries between the front of the plane and the rest of the plane. And it actually helped them come up with a solution when they were a long ways away from any other alternative. And I thought that was a great example of the ability. We talked about too many people with really strong Ds tend to only seek their own counsel.
Right.
Whereas if you have a mindset that says, in a situation with change and disruption, there's greater wisdom to be found at the margins, where people may not normally have a loud voice, but they're very close to the situation that I may be facing. How do I get in touch with them? How do I make connections with them quickly and meaningfully? Without my ego, my title, my position getting in the way. And this is a real challenge, I think, for many executives that I see in my work, is they are so accustomed to having a kind of power implicitly with them that it intimidates the voices on the edge, the smaller voices, from speaking up and sharing the information that could actually help lead to a new solution.
Ego is not the amigo.
Well said.
That is a fact of life. And yeah. There you go. Just a very simple concept. Get your ego out of the way.
Indeed. And if you do, then that leads to the third phase, which is now you're ready to actually commit to act. We call that making a purposeful choice. Purposeful because it is actually going to be in service of addressing the change that you said in the very beginning needs to happen, because there's danger, there's threat, there's disruption, there's something going on, and we need to address it. Now you have leaders who can set the tone through their actions. They're trusted. Crew members are willing to speak up and follow through. And then everybody's going to check and hold themselves accountable for how it actually gets done and how it follows through. We call that then the beginning of a virtuous cycle. Because when you've gained clarity, you've connected deeper, and you've committed to act, the next thing that you want to do is just to say, all right, so now that we've taken this action, is it helping us? Are we continuing to gain clarity? Or are we finding ourselves still just as confused? Let's keep cycling around in a positive way until we really feel like we are at our best.
Yep, I love it.
And this, by the way, we're talking about it at the team level, but we could have another conversation about what this looks like then when, as an enterprise, a whole organization, you want to have this same pattern being repeated. That's where we talk about a culture of resilience and some of the features there, maybe for another time.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's, this is business 101. I mean, it's amazing. It's
Yeah, it's very simple and yet so hard to remember to do when you're in the heat of battle.
Well, I think it's one of those things where, once again, I think, like everything in life, you at age 60, you're a different person than you were at 30 because you've learned things. But at age 40, at age 50, whatever. And these are things that you need to be taught to people. They're not necessarily, set, be very specific in what your goals are. What do you want? What's the overall goal? What's the future going to look like? What are the perils? To think about like a manager level person at Boeing or Pratt and Whitney or GE, they have to be taught these things. It's like everything. You want to talk about natural leaders or like Sanjay at Microsoft. A much better CEO than Ballmer was, and probably a much more brilliant CEO than Gates was. Along the same line.
By Gates' own admission, by the way.
Yeah, by Gates' own admission, but he had to teach, but he was able to teach future leaders of Microsoft where the business was going, what the expectations were, et cetera. And
And there's one other component to that, and that is at the same time that as a leader, we keep on being open to new learnings. There has to also be a parallel or a complementary willingness to unlearn.
Yeah.
To let go. I've got somebody I'm mentoring in succession planning. There is so much of my old knowledge that I used to be proud of, used to make my living off of, that I just need to let go. Partly for ego reasons, but also partly just because it no longer serves the purpose in today's business environment. And if I can't let go of that, if I'm so invested in hanging on to that old model, I'm not helping anybody else on my team.
The strongest question you can ask somebody is, what are you trying to get to? They tell you exactly, it's I want this, I want that, or we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then the question comes in, all right, great. You've just loaded up the grocery cart full of stuff.
Yes.
What are you trying to do? And then they'll crumble like a cookie. No, specifically, what are you trying to accomplish? And then you see the wheels in their brain start to turn, and they think about, okay, here's my big goals for where the board wants to go. Like Elliott Management at Southwest Airlines. Bob Jordan, Elliott. It's like, you guys have made all these changes. What are you, other than increase EBITDA value of the business and share, and what are you specifically trying to accomplish? I don't think they could tell you that right now.
And yet what you've done is gone right back to the phase one and getting to root causes. Why?
Great clarity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Biggest issue that, I think the biggest failure of any organization is there's a failure of the leadership to create clarity over what the goal truly is they want to accomplish.
Which is why you get to do what you do, is to help them see what they can't see themselves. in terms of why would we hire this person? Why would this be a good fit? Why wouldn't it work out? Right. And that's the fun thing I think about our kind of work is we get to ask those questions that other people might not feel comfortable asking, but they need to be asked.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's like I said, it all needs to be learned, and you learn it from somewhere. And if you're just sitting in an echo chamber and everybody's telling you what you want to hear, they're not doing you any favors.
Yeah.
Go outside. One thing I like to ask executives, I go, okay, who are the five people you talk to outside of your company?
Mm.
Who are your mentors? And the idea, it's where I got the idea was Wall Street Journal. There's a section of the Wall Street Journal on Saturday that talks to CEOs. Who do you go to? And it's a very basic concept. Who do you go to in outside your own little world to go get advice or opinions or thoughts, book ideas, whatever?
Absolutely.
Not many people have that.
Yeah, we talk about having to disrupt the echo chamber when you get into this. So that's really one of the connecting deeper is I don't keep talking to the people that I've always been talking to. So I listen more to people I have not been hearing from before because I know that this is a different environment. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Which is why we have kids, to help us realize how fossilized our thinking is becoming. And they can get through to us, hopefully.
The kids these days are pretty smart. I mentor a lot of college kids. I'm like, wow, they're actually, they're technically savvy. They're intelligent. They're keeping up. They're much smarter than I was in my 20s.
Yes. I've done a DNA test. My daughter is my daughter's, but my gosh, she has some thinking that I said, where did she get that idea from? And it's fun.
Yeah, no doubt. So that's great. So how did this, 1,000 pilots, what was the overall reaction to your study?
So the overall reaction of this study was twofold. Number one, we absolutely have to place more value on pilot leadership. And we're not just talking about, ALPA being able to have more say in the negotiation. This was about truly stepping up and creating an environment where there's trust to do the right thing. And there's some other airlines, Alaska Airlines had a marvelous example of being able to stop the whole fleet because they trusted one person in the system saying there's a computer error that's telling us something about the weight balance. It's causing tail drag. We cannot keep flying until I get this sorted out. Huge financial implications for doing that, but willing to do that. So that's the kind of thing that came out of this was we cannot underplay leadership. We really have to emphasize leadership. Two, business is tough. And so we're going to have to figure out a way to make leadership work and be viable in a very tough economic environment. And this is an ongoing work in progress. I would say right now, I feel like we've gotten through parts 1 and part 2 of the resilience model, where we're talking about that more clearly. We're also reaching outside to talk with others, bring them into the conversation. We're still moving carefully because there's a lot of implications for making a decision about how you structure things, how you resource crews, stations, et cetera. But at least people are gaining more confidence that when we do get to an action point, it's going to have a solid foundation because of the first 2 steps of the model we've done.
And the third thing is maybe a little bit about embrace change. It's coming.
Yes.
Change is strange. Sometimes it's hard to see through, but it's coming. So embrace it.
Absolutely.
Eric, thank you. Let's have a follow-up on this one. It's a great business conversation.
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you so much for having me. And let's stay in touch because I think we're kind of scratching the tip of the iceberg here on this topic.
Oh, we could talk about this we could do a Joe Rogan podcast to talk about this for hours, to be honest with you. But Eric Olson, spelled Olson, with EMO Advisors. You're out in California, out in Palm Springs area.
Indeed.
Thanks for coming on, Eric.
Thank you, Craig.